What we know is a drop. What we don't know is the ocean.
Hello and welcome to the Newton Knowledge Podcast. My name is Mark Singer, partner of Newton One Advisors, and I'm joined by our managing partner, Steve Target. The Newton Knowledge Podcast will provide meaningful content to our valued advisor community. Our discussions will deliver unique insights into the people, processes, and products that make our industry so critical. Newton One is a national life insurance planning firm delivering customized solutions structured to help clients and their advisors engaged in solving estate planning, wealth transfer, business succession, and executive benefits challenges. We are a member of the M Financial Group, which grants our clients access to the nation's elite carriers and exclusive products available only through our network. Fellow listeners, full transparency, I forgot to turn on 2 of the mics for this recording. Silver lining, the audio was still picked up through the computer, but there is a slight difference in sound quality throughout this episode. Please do not allow my incompetence as a podcaster to be the reason you miss out on some of the greatest minds in the estate planning world provide imperatively sound business succession planning advice. This road bump reminds us that we are insurance advisors first and podcasters at a very far second. Enjoy the episode. Cheers. I'll start with introductions. It seems a bit silly to have to introduce Manny Fournaris and Tom Hollinger in the great first state of Delaware, but since our podcast is nationally known now, I will do your introduction. So first we have our chief and commander, our founder, Tom Hollinger. And then we have Manny Fournaris, partner and founder of Fournaris Mammerela. We also have his son, Constantine, who is a new dad. To a daughter, right?
2 months old, yes.
2 months old, beautiful. What's her name?
Sophia.
Beautiful. And is this your first?
First grandchild.
Nice. Don't look a day over 40.
What's your grandpa name?
Papu. Which is Greek
for
grandfather.
We wanted to start, since our business is very relationship driven, we wanted to start with how you two met, Manny and Tom.
You want to start?
That's a great question. I had no idea.
No, are you serious?
I think, well,
Been that long?
I started practicing in 1985. And Tom, I think maybe a few years earlier than that. And one of my partners, Pete Corden, was pretty heavy into estate planning. And Tom was doing a lot of planning with doctor groups and other high net worth individuals. And basically we met probably in the mid 80s. And since then we've had a very good working relationship, which is both personal and business. And I consider it Tom to be a very good friend, and that's why we're playing golf today after this.
Yeah.
Well, we can hit the ball. Manny, we're going to talk about business succession planning, but sort of interesting is that succession planning in companies is very, very important, obviously. But what's unique in your situation is your son is in law practice with you. Can you just speak just a couple quick minutes, and Constantine, please jump in on some of the challenges and the advantages of having your son in your law practice and helping your clients with your son in introductions. Can the two of you just spend a couple of minutes and talk about some of the challenges and some of the advantages of that?
Well, I'll take the first shot at this, but again, our firm's a little unique in the sense that there is not a real succession planning buy-in, buy-out type of a structure. It's more of as you develop as an attorney and you develop relationships with clients, you start to progress in the company and you become basically a director, a shareholder. So it's not, and Tom, as you know, professional corporations have a different type of succession plan than typical retail or manufacturing type businesses. So in our business, the way you progress and become an owner and become a director and an equity shareholder in the company is by basically being a good attorney, generating revenue, doing good work, getting out and talking in the community and things like that. And over time, you rise in the corporation and you become an owner.
Constantine, what are some of those challenges and advantages in being with your father in a law firm as it relates to you and your dad personally, and as it relates to clients?
Well, with clients, I felt over the last year or two, I'm having an easier time to connect with the second generation in some of the family businesses.
Interesting, very interesting.
Similar situations, either father and mother is the matriarch, patriarch of the business. The second generation is working, their personal relationships, professional relationships, and a big gray area. So we talk about it and, try to figure out how to make things work really. But,
that's interesting because I really didn't think about that. Dealing with the second generation keeps the G2 in the law firm for a lot more years, so good for you. Manny, quick question. When you talk about business succession planning, has anything changed significantly over the last 30, 40 years in your practice when we talk about succession planning? Anything jump out at you?
It's an interesting question, Tom, because when I was giving some thought to this, it's probably the one area of my practice that has remained somewhat static over time, right?
What do you mean by static?
Or the purpose for succession planning has remained static. So, you do succession planning primarily because you want to keep outsiders out, and you want to create basically a market for the shares that would otherwise not be marketable. So that's basically the goals for succession planning, and they haven't changed. And then when you look at, the way these things are structured, there have been changes, but basically what you're looking at is identifying the applicable trigger events, what happens when one of those triggering events occurs, what's the purchase price, what's the payment terms. The basic structure for these business succession plans hasn't really changed a lot in my career. But what is starting to happen now, and I think is very important, is we have morphed away from using corporations for businesses towards limited liability companies, primarily because of the flexibility that LLCs offer. And we're starting to do a lot of what we call pre-liquidity planning, which is sort of the first step of succession planning for businesses. And
what do you mean by pre-liquidity planning? Define pre-liquidity planning.
So if somebody is, again, let's assume that the game plan for a family business owner is that he wants to sell his business as opposed to transferring it to the next generation. There's a lot of things that we do from an estate and business planning perspective to get the company ready to be sold. Okay, and so generally we talk about recapitalizing the company from voting and non-voting units, and because we're doing planning, one of the things we want to make sure is we don't take control away from the owner. And second, we're talking about how do you basically get these non-voting units out of the owner's estate into a trust and do it in a cost-effective, tax-efficient way, so that when there is a liquidity event, basically the growth is outside of the estate, not.
So you're actually lowering the estate for estate planning purposes?
Well, a lot of, I'll give you an example. We're working on a case right now, Constantine and I, where in 2012, client came to us and the husband wasn't doing very well, and they were 50-50 owners, and the company was getting ready to take off. And so what we ended up doing was a basic recapitalization where we created voting and non-voting shares, and the husband transferred the non-voting shares to a trust for the wife, a SLAT, a spousal lifetime access trust, and that was done at a valuation, if my memory serves me correctly, at about $1 million. Okay, in 2012. Today we're working on selling that business and the investment bankers are estimating that it's going to sell in the neighborhood of about $750 million.
Wow.
That's why they hire you.
And so you look at, you say, well, 2012, you know, we thought the business was going to take off, but we never anticipated it was going to take off in this magnitude. So in this particular case, 90% of the business is owned by a trust that's outside of the business and or outside of the owner's estate. And I think in that particular case, whether it was luck or skill, I don't know, but it worked out very well. And we probably have a couple other cases in that have been successful. But the thing you have to be careful about, because it's not always a one shoe fits all, because one of the negatives to doing a lot of this pre-liquidity planning is if the asset doesn't pass through somebody's estate, you don't get a basis step up.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you got to be very careful, because basis and taxes are very important in this planning. So in this particular case, we were very comfortable because this was in 2012. I can't remember the exact exemption amount, but I think it was a lot less than $30 million. It wasn't a hard decision to do it. Today it becomes a more difficult, or not more difficult, but just more careful analysis to make sure that the owner is really in a taxable estate. Because
Manny, thank you. Let me give you another situation. Let's say you have two partners that are not related. They built a very, very good company. Generation 2 of one partner is in the business. The other partner has no generation 2 in the business. Generation 1 wants to pass it down to generation 2. The other partner can't stand his partner's son. So how do you get around those? What are the things that you can do? And when I'm telling you, the other partner and generation 2 of his partner don't get along, I'm being mild. So how do you get everybody in the same room? How do you handle that kind of problem? And we're dealing with significant assets.
Well, let me tell you what I think is the most important part of succession planning is to get it set up early, so that you do it at a time when neither party knows who's buying and who's selling. And
so explain what that means.
So typically when we form an entity or when we get involved in an engagement, we will look at this issue related to succession planning, and if there's no agreement in place, we will suggest some type of an agreement. And you generally want to do it when the relationship between the owners is good and no one knows who's buying and who's selling. So typically when you get the agreements in place early, you tend to get a more fair agreement. Okay. Now in your particular situation, I don't know, if they have an agreement, obviously the agreement is going to be something that's going to control, at least to some extent, the direction we're going to go in. But, succession planning is designed in some respects to restrict the transfers, okay, to outsiders, yes. Okay, yes. And the definition of outsiders tends to vary depending on each business situation. But in each situation, you got to take a step back, because you got to really ask yourself who you represent in a particular transaction.
Great question. So in that situation, what do the two partners each get separate counsel?
Well, here's the thing. Typically, when you're dealing with a small business, you got a company, and let's just say we have two owners. Do you really need 3 lawyers for a situation like that? And so I have taken the position when it's appropriate that I represent the company and not the individual shareholders in drafting the agreement. So I'm trying to look out for what's in the best interest of the company when I'm putting these agreements together. And in your particular example, Tom, the question is, what's in the best interest of the company? If we're going to bring the G2 into the business as an owner, what does that mean in terms of the relationship with the other non-family member and things like that? And the one thing I'll stress is the biggest mistake you can make drafting a buy-sell agreement is to use a form. and try to fit a business or all the business into the same type of a structure. You really need to kind of get into the weeds and understand the business and make sure you understand the parties and what's important to them, because that's going to help you draft a good
So
agreement.
that's an interesting part. So every buy-sell agreement, every business succession agreement that you do is different in some way, shape, or form.
I will tell you right now that as we morphed away from corporations into limited liability companies, which, as you know, can elect to be taxed in a lot of different ways.
Yep.
I would say at our firm, we probably have north of 20 different variations of LLC agreements. So, for example, if you're going to do an LLC and it's going to be taxed as a partnership,
Yep.
it's going to look this way. If it's a C Corp, it's going to look different. If it's an S Corp, it's going to look, again, different than a C Corp. So, and then you're looking at, well, what's the asset that's owned by the entity? If it's an operating entity, then we have what we call business buy-sell provisions. If it's real estate and it's a passive type of investment, we're going to look at different provisions there. If it's all family members, we're going to look at it differently. So what I'm trying to say is you just can't put every business into the same form
So
type
my
document.
guess is businesses typically own real estate, and then you have the business itself.
Well,
Is that two separate agreements?
yes, because well, it depends. Typically, you're going to do two separate agreements because you're generally not going to want to put the real estate into the same entity.
Into the LLC.
Yeah, well, into the business entity, because
Right.
you want for separation of liability. So you're always going to end up with, well, almost always end up with two agreements, two entities. And then the question is going to be, how integral is the real estate to the business operation? And if it's integral, like let's say it's a manufacturing facility and it's got equipment and all kinds of, other things that are necessary to the operation of the business, then you're going to tie the two agreements together. Okay.
How are you? You had two separate agreements, but how are you tying the two agreements together? I don't quite understand that concept.
Well, from a business perspective, the business owner, whoever it might end up being, needs to control the real estate in some respect. So we usually do it through an option to purchase the real estate, or through a right of first refusal, or a long-term lease, something that is going to actually, because you can't have the ownership and the management of these entities disconnect, because they are integral to each other.
So when you have these two different entities looking at the real estate, it's probably not the best idea. My guess is that the two partners say, if I die, my ownership in the real estate goes to my wife.
Well, it might not be bad.
But can't she control some of the rent payments and everything like
Not
that?
if you have a long-term lease. So think of it this way. Let's say you and I own a business and we're 50-50, and you and I own an LLC that owns real estate 50-50. It doesn't mean necessarily that the buy-sell provisions in both agreements are going to be identical.
Oh, I understand that. Yes, right.
So in a
I'm just talking about the real
with
estate.
real estate, if you have a 50-50 situation, even if the wife is the 50% owner, if there is a long-term lease in place that dictates what the rent is and what you can do with the property and who pays what expenses, in some respects, she's a passive owner and it really doesn't impact the business. So again, every situation is different. And
What happens if you don't have a long-term lease?
well, then you have an LLC with a husband. Well, I say owner one and owner two's spouse, right?
Right.
Having to negotiate a lease with a corporation or an entity that might be owned just by owner one. So
she
it might
can't-
create issues.
But what you don't want to happen is have her for sale the real estate that's very important to the business itself.
Well, in a situation like that where you have two 50-50 members of an LLC that owns real estate and they're deadlocked,
I bet
that's
that
a
never
problem,
happens.
right? Yeah. So that's just basically, I'm going to say poor planning kind of thing. But one of the things that Constantine and I do a lot of is we have at our firm, we represent a lot of closely held businesses, and we have a pretty well structured we call it our corporate retainer program, okay, where we tend to be or act as sort of like outside counsel or general counsel to a lot of businesses. And one of the things we do is we have year-end meetings with these clients where we do a lot of tax and business planning, and we go through a pretty well-structured program. It's almost like getting physical for the business every year. But one of the things we talk about is succession planning. We talk about leases. We talk about employment agreements, non-compete. We go through a whole list of items that we talk about. But the point I'm trying to make here is with anything you do, you got to be proactive. You can't be, well, we did the buy-sell agreement. We then put it in the top drawer of our desk, and we don't look at it again.
Yeah, I have to tell you, man, I realize that's something your firm does, which I think is excellent, because so many times business owners do their buy-sell agreements for the business, do the buy-sell agreements for the real estate, and you're absolutely correct. They put it in the drawer, and nobody looks at it for 10 years until something happens. And what you're doing, and what I would suggest to people that own companies, to be proactive in going to seek counsel. I know it costs $1 or $2, but I think the half an hour discussion with counsel, along with your accountant, with the attorney for 1 year, and just ask the questions. What happened? What's going on? Anything changed? Review the documents, because I know for a fact that, after 8 years, they have no idea what's in the documents. So I think your point is extremely well taken, that if you own a company, take the time, spend $1 or $2, and meet with your advisors once a year to update what's going on. And the best end result is nothing's fine. Then just leave and move to the next year again.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's a good point. I think, we had talked about this even when we deal with life insurance policies, like permanent type policies, right? You buy a permanent policy, and then you never go back and look at the premiums and the performance and things like that. And that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make, is not basically being proactive in terms of your business. And I think that's when you run into a lot of problems.
What are you seeing? You mentioned this earlier. Is Gen 2 coming into the business, or are most businesses selling to an outside party now? Or has that changed over your years of practice?
Well, I think over the years, I've seen more selling now than in the past. Okay.
Private equity's taking it.
Yeah, private equity,
especially in the blue collar jobs or businesses.
That's a good question, Mark, because
a keen interest into those, which is,
I would say in the early years, transitioning from G1 to G2 was more prevalent.
Yeah.
Today, people are looking at, they're really exploring this option of selling much more than they did in the past. And I think it's partly because the markets are more developed.
Yeah.
And there's a real push right now in the business world to consolidate businesses, basically to get them under an umbrella, whether it's private equity or a publicly traded company. There's a real push to consolidate. So, owners, and again, I don't think there's a right or a wrong. It really depends on whether they get a member that makes them happy.
Yeah.
Whether there's a mesh, a mix between the buyer and the seller. Because a lot of times, believe it or not, money's important. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of times business owners want to make sure that whoever the buyer is going to provide a good home for their employees, a good home for their customers and their clients. They just don't want to sell to somebody that's going to, destroy the business. To answer your question, Mark, I think we're seeing more selling today than we did 20 years ago.
You take the economy out of it. Do you think Gen 2 just isn't interested in being in the business? Or am I making...
It's hard to make that, that generalization. I think some of the issues are driven by liquidity.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you get ownership from Gen 1 to Gen 2? You got to look at each situation and analyze it separately. You can't just put everybody in the same box, but sometimes you're dealing with situations where the value is so high that you just can't do it cost effectively.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
so you're forced to look at an outside sale. But, the one thing that people need to realize is that, one of these buy-sell events is eventually going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? We're all going to die, but, you're going to have a disability, you're going to have a retirement, you're going to have a divorce, you're going to have a termination of employment. Things are going to happen. And you either are going to be in the forefront and have an agreement that's in place that's going to tell you what to do, or you're going to react and try to figure out what to do, in what is most likely an adversarial relationship.
Yeah.
Or what develops into an adversarial relationship.
This has been great. Tom's giving me the eye to wrap this up. I think he's podcasted out. So
Well, no, we need to go play golf.
we need to go play golf is the real answer. But before I got to ask this question while I have you two here. You're both very successful in your own practice. What would you tell the younger advisors, say a 35-year-old? How old are you, Constantine?
33.
33-year-old attorney, life insurance industry. What would you tell your younger selves at 35 or 33 after being in the business and being as successful as you've been?
I mean, from my perspective, the thing that the younger generation is dealing with right now is more of this desire to have a balance between work, family, personal life, and things like that. Back in the old days, it was more driven by work, and family and personal things kind of took a back seat to work. I think, and I'm not saying one's right and the other's wrong. It's just that it's something we're seeing now. People tend to want to live a more balanced life, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's probably one of the biggest changes I've seen. I don't know from your perspective.
He's always taken the position that we're in a service business.
Yeah.
So we always need to serve our clients, get back to them ASAP, no matter who it is. Always get things done as soon as you can. So he's very much a more up-tempo worker than I am. And I think that's from what he was saying.
Up-tempo.
That,
It's on the coffee.
as polite as I could put it. So I think that is one thing he tries to drive into me, at least when I'm working, is, you're in the service business.
He's right.
You got to get back to your clients. You got to, make them feel happy. You got to make them feel that what you did was worth it and that you resolved anything and everything they asked. So that's probably the one thing he passed down to me. He's like, don't forget, this is a service business.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing, at least at our practice. I mean, we have a sort of an informal policy that you have to return a call within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And even if you can't talk to the client, you ask your assistant to reach out to them, schedule time when you can do the call. But you can't ignore a client for 2 days, 3 days, a week, because one of the things you talk about, how do you become successful, is you got to make that client. I mean, we have 5,000 clients at the firm, and I probably work on 20 or 30 matters every day. How do you make that one client feel like he's the most important person when he's talking to you? And it really, it's something you learn over time, but you got to focus on that relationship, and you got to make that person feel like he's got all your attention and he's the most important thing, and you hope you do a good job for him, and at the end they pay your bill and they remain clients.
Yeah, I guess I would say, Mark, that I've always thought, say please and thank you, show up in time, and do what you said you were going to do. The other thought is, I think in any business, is understand your business and understand your products probably better than anybody else. And I couldn't agree with Manny more. And the fact of the matter is, listen a lot and speak a little. Because when you're dealing with business owners, it's their problem, and the more you listen and the least you talk, the better off you're going to be.
Every business is unique.
Yep.
And you have to understand the business, and you have to understand the owners, what's important to them, in order to be able to draft an agreement that works.
You have anything, Steve? You didn't get to talk at all, right?
No, I just took it all in. I'm glad to be part of this group.
Well, thank you, thank all three of you, Tom, Manny, Constantine, for joining us. This was
Thank
really
you.
great.
Thank you.
It's a great opportunity to work with you guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Manny.
Are we off?
We're off.
All right, so the first time I
Hang on.
met Tom
Hold on,
Hollinger-
hold on.
Bye. Goodbye.
The material and opinions voiced are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what is appropriate for you, please contact a member of our team.